Thank you very much for joining me here today. I'm Don Ma. To start off, nearly 10,000 migrants a day. That's what federal officials are encountering at the U.S. southern border on an average day in December. This is among the highest numbers ever recorded, and with multiple border entry points remaining closed as the surge at the southern border escalates. U.S. officials now warning that the situation is near, quote, a breaking point. Here's the story.
Apprehensions of migrants crossing the southern U.S. border are once again reaching record levels. A Department of Homeland Security official tells CNN the average number of encounters in the last week is 9,600 per day. This rate of apprehensions has not been seen since earlier this year, in the days before the lifting of the COVID-era restriction known as Title 42. Republican Congressman Tony Gonzalez says the situation is spiraling out of control again.
Border Patrol agents are doing everything they can to take care of the situation, but they are completely overwhelmed, completely just overwhelmed with the situation, and it's getting worse.
This spot along the Rio Grande in Eagle Pass, Texas, is the focal point of the southern border migration crisis. Despite miles of razor wire, steel containers on the riverbank, and thousands of federal, state, and local authorities on the ground, thousands cross this spot every day.
Going up and up and up.
Sheriff Tom Schmerber says a zero-tolerance immigration policy won't keep migrants from crossing the border illegally into the U.S., but he says the Biden administration needs to do more to get it under control.
Best thing to do is for the federal government to work with the government from Mexico. Hopefully they can persuade them to put some kind of a portal system over there on their border, north border over there, well, south border. And help us stop those immigrants coming from Mexico.
President Joe Biden spoke with Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador on Thursday. The administration said both men agreed more needs to be done to stop the historic migration flow. And the Mexican president announced Friday he will meet with the U.S. Secretary of State and Secretary of Homeland Security next week in Mexico City. U.S. border authorities remain overwhelmed. Immigration processing facilities are filled, and the strain on resources is creating staggering delays and long lines at ports of entry for border residents. No one has figured out how to overcome the tidal wave of misinformation that largely influences migrants as they make their way north to the U.S. border. Border authorities say these migrants are convinced that crossing illegally between ports of entry is routine.
There's a lot of misinformation going on the Mexican side. The migrants are believing that this is an official port or an official way to enter the U.S., which is completely wrong.
In places like Eagle Pass, the daily flow of migrants crossing the Rio Grande doesn't appear to be slowing down anytime soon.
The Mexican president said on Friday his government will reinforce measures to contain migration as he seeks to help the United States cope with record numbers of people trying to reach the U.S. Here's more.
Mexican authorities on Friday sent a plane load of migrants from Piedras Negras, near the U.S. border, to southern Mexico to be returned to their countries of origin. The move came just hours after Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador announced that his government will reinforce measures to contain migration. As the United States copes with record numbers of people trying to reach the U.S. border, Mexico is looking to help. We will boost as much as we can to help maintain an orderly flow, said López Obrador, adding, recently there was an abnormal surge. López Obrador's comments came a day after he spoke with U.S. President Joe Biden. Both agreed that more enforcement was needed at their shared frontier, as record numbers of migrants disrupt border trade. This year, the number of migrants crossing the perilous Darien Gap, straddling Colombia and Central America, topped 500,000, double that of last year's record. News of López Obrador's comments reached migrants as they made their way through Mexico to the U.S. border.
Sí, quizás sí los afecta porque...
Honduran migrant Curlin Silva said the new rules might mean he won't be able to, quote, fulfill the American dream. According to the United Nations, migrants are heading through Mexico to the U.S. to escape violence, economic distress, and the negative impacts of climate change. López Obrador said Mexico would also step up containment efforts on its southern border with Guatemala, as his government seeks agreements with other countries to manage the northbound migrant flows. Top U.S. officials are set to visit Mexico next week to follow up on the call between López Obrador and Biden.
And U.S. stocks ended mixed on Friday, but investors headed into the long Christmas weekend with all three of Wall Street's main indexes notching their 8th straight week of gains, which is the longest weekly winning streak for the S&P 500 since late 2017. Here's a quick recap of markets.
U.S. stocks gyrated to a mixed close on Friday as investors headed into the long Christmas weekend after digesting cooler-than-expected inflation data that firmed bets the Federal Reserve will cut interest rates next year. The Dow dipped fractionally, while the S&P 500 and NASDAQ each gained about 0.2%. All three indexes notched their 8th consecutive weekly gains, the longest weekly winning streak for the S&P since late 2017. The benchmark index is now within 1% of its record close reached in January of 2022. Breaking that level would confirm the S&P has been in a bull market since a low hit in October of that year. But bumpier times could be in store, says Philip Colmar, managing partner and global strategist at MRB Partners.
The market's been rallying for weeks now on really exiting 2023 on the back of optimism around the Fed and its pivot towards an easier policy. And so while I think that that's been positive, a lot of this Goldilocks scenario is now in the markets, both in the bond market and the equity market. So opening 2024, probably going to be choppier as we start to digest that.
In economic data, the Commerce Department's Personal Consumption Expenditures, or PCE report, out Friday, showed inflation continues to ease down toward the Fed's average annual 2% target, reinforcing the belief that the central bank could begin cutting rates as early as March. In company news, shares of Nike tumbled 12% after the sportswear maker trimmed its annual sales forecast due to cautious consumer spending. Peers Foot Locker and Dick's Sporting Goods shed 2.7% and 3.9% respectively. And Karuna Therapeutics soared nearly 48% in the wake of Bristol Myers Squibb's agreement to acquire the drug maker for $14 billion in cash. U.S. markets are closed Monday for the Christmas holiday.
More shippers say they're avoiding the Red Sea following attacks on merchant vessels, threatening growing disruptions for global trade. Here's the report.
More shipping companies are set to avoid the Red Sea following attacks on merchant vessels by Houthi militants. German container line Hapag-Lloyd is among the latest to say it will steer clear. 25 of its ships will be rerouted before the end of the year. Hong Kong's OOCL is making a similar move. Ships will have to take longer routes to avoid the hotspot, and that could roil supply chains worldwide. The Suez Canal route accounts for about 12% of global trade. Costs will jump too, with the price of shipping a container from China to the Mediterranean up 44% just this month. Experts say anything that is moved by sea, from toys to food and clothing, could be at risk. Concern over disruption to supplies is driving commodity prices higher too. Metals prices rose Friday, as did benchmark oil prices. Crude jumped around 1%, though traders say the impact on supplies should actually be limited. Relatively little oil is shipped through the Red Sea. Much now depends on the International Naval Task Force being set up by Washington. The Pentagon says over 20 countries have signed up to take part, though some did not want to be named. Vessels from the US, British and French navies have already shot down Houthi drones in the area. On Thursday, UK Foreign Minister David Cameron met his Egyptian counterpart to discuss the crisis.
It's absolutely essential that those maritime corridors, that the free movement of ships, of goods, of manufacturers, of oil, of world trade, that they keep going.
The crisis grew out of the war between Israel and Palestinian militant group Hamas, which runs Gaza. Yemen's Houthis have threatened to target all ships heading to Israel in response.
Chinese regulators announced a wide range of rules aimed at curbing spending and rewards that encourage video games. And this is dealing a blow to the world's biggest games market, which returned to growth this year. Here are the details.
China has made strict new rules for its multi-billion-dollar gaming industry. Regulators want to curb spending and rewards that encourage video games. Online games will now effectively have spending limits and face bans from giving rewards to players if they log in every day. Rewards also can't be given to anyone who spends on the game for the first time or if they spend several times on the game consecutively. The decision spooked investors and dealt a blow to the world's biggest games market, which returned to growth this year. Shares in gaming giant Tencent were down as much as 16% Friday, while its closest rival NetEase was down by a quarter. Beijing has taken a tough line on video games over the years. It set strict playtime limits for players younger than 18 2 years ago. It also suspended the approval of new video games for about 8 months, citing gaming addiction concerns. Last year was China's gaming industry's most difficult year on record, as total revenue shrank for the first time. The crackdown formally ended in 2022 as new game approvals resumed. China's video game market returned to growth this year as domestic revenue rose 13% to $42.6 billion, according to industry data.
Vandalism and protesting at Starbucks locations, but caused by a big misunderstanding. And TV's Sean Marshall explains.
Starbucks boss Laxman Narasimhan has published a letter calling for peace and blaming misrepresentation of its views concerning the Israel-Gaza war. Although he didn't specifically name the Israel-Gaza war in the letter, the claimed misrepresentation has caused rampant vandalism of its stores. Multiple times, pro-Palestinian protests across the United States have attacked Starbucks, and quite often in New York City, attaching these stickers to windows and doors has become a popular thing to do. In the letter, Narasimhan said, "Many of our stores have experienced incidents of vandalism. We see protesters influenced by misrepresentation on social media of what we stand for," he said. CEO also added, "In my daily meditation, I pray for peace immediately." Apparently, it all started back in October when Starbucks' union, Starbucks Workers United, posted solidarity with Palestine on social media platform X, causing Starbucks and the union, organizing its workers, to sue each other in a standoff. Starbucks sued for trademark infringement of their name and logo and said their reputation was damaged and angered hundreds of customers and received over thousands of complaints. Workers United responded with its own filing, saying it can continue to use Starbucks' name and a similar logo. Workers United also said Starbucks defamed the union by implying that it supports terrorism and violence. The CEO's letter gave a very PR-compatible response. "Our stance is clear. We stand for humanity." Sean Marshall, NTD News.
Could the new year bring a spike in marriage proposals? One retailer seems to think so. Here's a look at what economists say it means about the U.S. economy.
Get ready for more moments like these. The largest jewelry company in the U.S. is predicting a marriage proposal rebound in 2024 after a pandemic-triggered drop. According to Signet Jewelers, engagements will soar as high as 2.5 million in 2024. And economists say household creations gives you an indication of how the U.S. economy is doing.
Jobs are plentiful, and it's one of the reasons why you're seeing an increase in household formations. Right? And that often precedes an increase in demand for things like jewelry, which is what you see around engagements and marriages.
Signet Jewelers says sales of engagement rings took a hit during the pandemic, but that's changed with the return of pre-pandemic rituals like safe face-to-face dating.
So I think that's a very good sign that gives you just a really strong sense of just how robust portions of the consumer market are and just how solid the U.S. economy is.
Meanwhile, lab-grown diamond sales are surging. Data from last March shows consumers are choosing artificial diamonds over the real thing.
Can you tell which one is the lab diamond and which one is the natural? They truly look identical to me.
Factory-made diamonds look the same as naturally occurring ones. The only noticeable difference is the price tag.
It just depends if they want a large stone, a good quality and clarity. They might have to go lab if it's not in their budget.
And it seems like the holiday season drove up U.S. retail sales for the end of the year, but at a slower pace than the same time last year. MasterCard's Spending Pulse reported that retail sales jumped 3.1% from November 1st to December 24th, compared to the same time frame in 2022. The data came from in-store and online retail sales. The report says spending increased in many areas, with restaurants seeing a nearly 8% jump and apparel increasing 2.4%. Retailers had actually projected slower growth this holiday shopping season due to inflation, higher borrowing costs, and the resumption of student loan payments. For some, a natural diamond is the ultimate luxury, but for an award-winning British designer, she sees greater worth in jewelry crafted using laboratory-grown gems and metals recycled from cans. Here's the story.
6 of these cans turn into an ingot like this that can then be cast into a pair of earrings like this.
These poppy earrings are made of recycled aluminum. They were crafted by London-based designer Annabella Chan, whose jewelry designs rely on lab-grown diamonds, recycled aluminum, and pearls grown using regenerative farming techniques. Chan says she chose her materials after witnessing what she said were poor working conditions in diamond mines in Sri Lanka.
And that for me was a life-changing experience. So seeing the conditions of how people worked and how little they were paid, and yet these are some of the most precious and valuable commodities there are in the world, just didn't make any sense to me.
In order to make diamonds, Chen relies on suppliers who use technology to capture carbon dioxide emissions that would otherwise be released into the atmosphere.
Diamonds are made of carbon, sapphires are made of corundum, which is an aluminium oxide, rubies are aluminium oxide with chromium. So once you know what things are made of, you can sort of work backwards. So laboratory-grown gemstones are about mimicking the conditions within the earth where gemstones are formed, but in a controlled environment.
In November, the young designer won the Game Changer category at the British Luxury Awards. Chan's company does not give sales figures, but says it has seen strong demand since the COVID-19 pandemic. The lab-grown jewelry market has seen annual growth of 20% in recent years, driving global profits to $15 billion. That's according to Edon Golan Diamond Research and Data. As more producers enter the market, the price of lab-grown diamonds has fallen, and brands are looking to differentiate themselves, especially through designs. Joshua Brahman is the head of diamonds at Pandora, a major retailer of lab-grown diamonds.
Customers buying lab-grown diamonds can enter for a variety of reasons. Maybe for them, the sustainability factor is important. Maybe it's the price-value equation, right? In our case, we believe it's both of those things, but also that we offer really an array of proprietary and very interesting, meaningful, emblematic designs.
For Chan, it's about creating a fine jewelry brand that's highly crafted, but also sustainable and accessible for a broader customer base.
I think working with laboratory-grown diamonds and laboratory-grown color stones for me really brings a glimpse into the future of what fine jewelry looks like, because I think it is about a celebration of science and art together.
Student loan payments have resumed for months now, but despite that, it seems like millions of student loan borrowers in the U.S. have yet to start to pay back the loans. Here's more. And now joining us here is Derek Georgino, risk consultant in the greater LA area and NTD contributor. So Derek, it seems like millions of student loan borrowers are still not paying back payments. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, I think it was back in June, estimated that 1 in 5 or 20% of students with federal student loans had certain risk factors that were going to lead to them potentially not being able to make a payment at the end of the 3-year student loan reprieve. Well, the data that just came out shows it's actually 40%, Don. So first payments came due in October, and 40%, nearly half of borrowers did not make their first payment.
And what do you think is contributing to this? Because it's been months now that student loans have resumed.
Yeah, well, in terms of root causes, I think there's unfortunately something rotten in the way that our society handles its personal finance habits, particularly millennials aged 30 to 39, which the data shows is shouldering an immense amount of credit card debt and student loans. I think we need to change our society's attitude about the purpose and value of a college education. It's not just an experience. It's meant to develop yourself and really grow yourself into the professional world. Really, people should look at a college experience as something that should yield a return on investment, not just yield an experience. And unfortunately, that's resulting in people shouldering up to $250,000 in debt in order to partake in fields of study that just don't yield a return on that investment.
So 40%, what kind of number are we looking at here? Paint us a real world picture.
Yeah, it's about 9 million borrowers, okay, out of the 22 million or so that have taken federal student loans who have not made the first payment due now in October. And mind you, there was a 3-year reprieve on these student loan bonds. There's really no excuse to not have buttoned up your personal finances a little bit and be prepared to make that first payment come October here. Another piece of bad news for these borrowers is that the interest actually started accruing again in September, 1 month earlier. So these folks, much like our government, might I add, are going to struggle keeping up with the interest alone on the principal of their debt, especially with higher interest rates and so forth.
So they're seeing the interest accruing and their balances growing. I mean, what's the end game here? They're seeing this.
Yeah, well, the end game is not great for the youth of our society. Student loan debt is one issue, Don, but there's other indicators that show how indebted our society is. It was just reported about a month ago, I think, that the nation's credit card debt has reached an all-time high of over $1 trillion. Again, young people being disproportionately affected by that. With the student loans, the average monthly payment for these folks is anywhere between $200 to $300. Now, Don, average monthly subscription expenses that young people are paying, about $200, and some don't even know it. So I think a potential solution to this problem is engaging in honest introspection about oneself, personal finance habits, and making some corrections.
And what's your thought on this, that people are not paying back their student loans and yet credit card debt are growing, and there's reports that people are increasingly using buy now, pay later, which is essentially more loans. So people are not paying back their loans but taking on more loans. How does that make sense?
Yeah, well, again, it doesn't make sense. But when I was on this show earlier, I mentioned the importance of personal finance education at a young age, to teach people that money does not grow on trees and that in the real world, you have an obligation to pay your debts. And unfortunately, in many cases, people are defaulting to using their credit cards, which carry dangerously high interest rates. We need to change the way we think about college education, though, Don, right? People are way too willing to indebt themselves into bankruptcy just to get a traditional 4-year education at a college or university.
Do you think this is a result of potentially circumstance where they're forced to do this, or is it a mentality type of thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's not just on young people, these decisions to go to college and incur all this debt and study something that doesn't yield a return on investment. It is also, frankly, the fault of their parents. Right. And so I understand most parents want to see their child get a top-rate education at a top-rate institution, and they'll do anything in their power to ensure that that happens. However, a college education is not for everybody, particularly if they're not intending to really follow through on a passion or study something that's going to put them in a good position financially later on in life. Money in and of itself, Don, is not happiness, right? But bankruptcy certainly begets sadness. And so people need to get very real with the way that they view their finances and the way that they view the purpose of a college education. America will have a shortage, Don, of 400,000 welders within the next couple of years. Does it seem like the society can keep itself that way, how are we going to build? There's going to be a shortage in thousands of plumbers soon as well. You know, trade school is now undervalued, despite often cases yielding a higher return on investment than a traditional four-year college or university.
So what do you think happens next? People aren't paying back their student loans, millions of dollars not being paid back when they're supposed to. What's next?
It is going to have serious ramifications on the health of our economy, Don. When a society indebts itself this badly, it will eventually boil over. And when it boils over, people file for bankruptcy, people's homes foreclose, and it damages the retail economy. Consumer demand plummets, consumer confidence plummets, people don't spend as much, they can't pay their debts. There are so many downstream effects to our economy. Our nation cannot sustain itself this way. We have to change the way we look at debt and personal finance. Just so all of your viewers know, when you take a loan, you need to repay it. And the creditors are going to knock on your door one day or another after they're done charging you 20 to 30% interest and they see you're not paying. And your assets are going to get repossessed and you're going to go bankrupt and you're going to be in a worse position than you were before. And believe it or not, some of these issues are much more easily resolvable than you think.
Well, the Federal Reserve will just bail us out, right? I mean, if you look at the bank failures.
If your name is General Motors, they might. But if your name is Don Ma or Derek Georgino, I wouldn't count on that, if I'm quite honest. So no, I don't think your ordinary American citizen's getting bailed out. I think maybe some of these big creditors and lenders might when they run insolvent because they're recklessly issuing loans to people who can't repay them. But yeah, no, Don, I don't think you and I are getting bailed out anytime soon. But you know, thankfully, I don't know that you or I have these issues.
So if a borrower files for bankruptcy, is that in the end going to be very damaging to them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you might have to surrender some of your assets. You're certainly not going to be in a position to indulge any further. I mean, I see these folks, they come out of their college education, $200,000 plus in debt. They don't have really much of a career because they studied philosophy, which is only good for making you a professor. So there's just a circular cycle there. And then they go on these big grand Euro trips with their friends that cost thousands of dollars that they don't have. And by the end of it, they say they've discovered themselves on Instagram, but they're left with $10,000 in new credit card debt. So our society's behavior is destructive and it's widespread. And again, it unfortunately is an issue with the millennial generation, disproportionately ages 30 to 39, particularly as it relates to credit card debt. Credit card interest rates are not like what you get with a mortgage interest rate. These things are like 20+%, Don, and even in growing with higher interest rates now. So people need to be very careful. A lot of people make minimum payments every month and they don't even realize what their credit card statement has ballooned to. Same goes for their student loans.
All right, just one last comment from you today. The saying goes, credit is the lifeblood of the economy, but maybe to a certain degree, maybe too much debt is not good.
Yeah, well, look, free money at low cost, if you have the financial health to pay it back in the near or medium term, can be a good thing. There are benefits to using your credit card, points, cash back, but you need to use it responsibly. Credit card debt has ballooned to over $1 trillion in this society. Sometimes that can be indicative of healthy consumer demand and economic growth. But if done recklessly, it can also lead to bankruptcy, insolvency. I should add, credit card delinquencies are at an all-time high too. So this growth in credit card debt has not necessarily been good news, as there's also record high delinquency rates.
Well, all right. Thank you very much today, Derek. Happy holidays. Thanks for coming on.
You as well, Don. Thank you.